Good morning, 5A and 5B now. Right, carrying on with the Howl's Moving Castle. This is chapter 17. You might remember from the last time that after the great sort of battle between the witch and Howl in Porthaven, the witch now kind of knows where they are, and they have to move the house. And they have to move the castle to a new disguise, a new place. So this is chapter 17. In which the moving castle moves house. Howl set to work as hard as if he had just had a week's rest. If Sophie had not seen him fight a grueling magic battle an hour ago, she never would have believed it. He and Michael dashed about, calling measurements to one another and chalking strange signs in the places where they had earlier put up metal brackets. They seemed to have chalk on every corner, including the backyard. Sophie's cubby hole under the stairs and the odd-shaped place in the bathroom ceiling gave them quite a bit of trouble. Sophie and the dog man were pushed this way and that, and then pushed aside completely so that Michael could crawl about, chalking a 5-pointed star inside a circle on the floor. Michael had done this and was brushing dust and chalk off his knees when Howl came racing in with patches of whitewash all over his black clothes. Sophie and the dog man were pushed aside again, so that Howl could crawl about, writing signs in and around both star and circle. Sophie and the dog man went to sit on the stairs. The dog man was shivering. This did not seem to be magic he liked. Howl and Michael raced out into the yard. Howl raced back. "Sophie," he shouted, "quickly, what are we going to sell in that shop?" "Flowers," Sophie said, thinking of Mrs. Fairfax again. "Perfect," said Howl, and hurried over to the door with a pot of paint and a small brush. He dipped the brush in the pot and carefully painted the blue blob yellow. He dipped again. This time the brush came out purple. He painted the green blob with it. At the third dip, the paint was orange, and the orange went over the red blob. Howl did not touch the black blob. He turned away, and at the end of his sleeve went painting along with the brush. "Botheration," said Howl again, dragging it out. The trailing tip of the sleeve was all the colours of the rainbow. Howl shook it and it was black again. "Which suit is that really?" Sophie asked. "I've forgotten. Don't interrupt. The difficult part is just coming up," Howl said, rushing the paint pot back to the bench. He picked up a small jar of powder. "Michael, where's the silver shovel?" Michael raced in from the yard with a big gleaming spade. The handle was wood, but the blade did seem to be solid silver. "All set out there," he said. Howl rested the shovel on his knee in order to chalk a sign on both handle and blade. He sprinkled red powder from the jar on it. He put a pinch of the same grains carefully in each point of the star and tipped all the rest into the middle. "Stand clear, Michael," he said. "Everyone stay clear. Are you ready, Calcifer?" Calcifer emerged from between his logs in a long thread of blue flame. "As ready as I shall ever be," he said. "You know this could kill me, don't you?" "Look on the bright side," said Howl. "It could be me it kills." "Hold on tight. 1, 2, 3, and he dug the shovel into the grate, very steadily and slowly, keeping it level with the bars. For a second he juggled it carefully to get it under Calcifer. Then even more steady and gently he raised it. Michael was quite obviously holding his breath. "Done it," said Howl. Logs toppled sideways. They did not seem to be burning. Howl stood up and turned around, carrying Calcifer on the shovel. The room filled with smoke. The dogman whined and shivered. Howl coughed. He had a little trouble holding the shovel steady. Sophie's eyes were watering, and it was hard to see clearly, but as far as she could tell, Calcifer, just as he had said to her, did not have feet or legs either. He was a long, pointed blue face, rooted in a faintly glowing black lump. The black lump had a dent in front of it, which at first suggested that Calcifer was kneeling on tiny folded legs. But Sophie saw that was not so, when the lump rocked slightly, showing it was rounded underneath. Calcifer obviously felt terribly unsafe. His orange eyes were rounded with fear, and he kept shooting feeble arm-shaped flames out on either side in a useless attempt to take hold of the sides of the shovel. "Won't be long," Howl choked, trying to be soothing. But he had to shut his mouth hard and stand for a moment, trying not to cough. The shovel wobbled and Calcifer looked terrified. Howl recovered. He took a long, careful step into the next circle, into the chalked circle, and then another, into the centre of the 5-pointed star. There, holding the shovel out level, he turned slowly round, one complete turn, and Calcifer turned with him, sky blue and staring with panic. It felt as if the whole room turned with them. The dogman crouched close to Sophie. Michael staggered. Sophie felt as if their piece of the world had come loose and was swinging and jigging round in a circle sickeningly. She did not blame Calcifer for looking so frightened. Everything was still swinging and swaying as Howl took the same careful steps out of the star and out of the circle. He knelt down by the hearth and with enormous care slid Calcifer back into the grate and packed the logs around him. Calcifer flopped with green flames uppermost. Howl leaned on the shovel and coughed. The room rocked and settled. For a few instants, while the smoke still hung everywhere, Sophie saw to her amazement the well-known outlines of the parlour in the house where she'd been born. She knew it, even though its floor was bare boards and there were no pictures on the wall. The castle room seemed to wriggle itself into place inside the parlour, pushing it out here, pulling it in there, bringing the ceiling down to match its own beamed ceiling, until the two melted together and became the castle again, except perhaps now a bit higher and squarer than it had been. "Have you done it, Calcifer?" coughed Howl. "I think so," Calcifer said, rising up the chimney. He looked none the worse for his ride on the shovel. "You'd better check me, though." Howl helped himself up on the shovel and opened the door with the yellow blob downwards. Outside in the street was market chipping that Sophie had known all her life. People she knew were walking past in the evening, taking a stroll before supper the way a lot of people did in summer. Howl nodded at Calcifer, shut the door, turned the knob orange down and opened it again. A wide, weedy drive wound away from the door now, among clumps of trees most picturesquely lit sideways by the low sun. In the distance stood a grand stone gateway with statues on it. "Where's this?" said Howl. An empty mansion at the end of the valley," Calcifer said, rather defensively. "It's the nice house you told me to find. It's quite fine." "I'm sure it is," Howl said. "I simply hope the real owners don't object." He shut the door and turned the knob to purple down. "Now for the moving castle," he said as he opened it again, and it was nearly dusk out there. A warm wind full of different scents blew in. Sophie saw a bank of dark leaves drift by, loaded with big purple flowers among the leaves. It spun slowly away, and its place was taken by a stand of dim white lilies and a glimpse of sunset on the water beyond. The smell was so heavenly that Sophie was halfway across the room before she was aware. "No, your long nose stays out of there until tomorrow," Howl said, and he shut the door with a snap. "That part's right on the edge of the waist. Well done, Calcifer. Perfect. A nice house with lots of flowers, as ordered." He flung the shovel down and went to bed, and he must have been tired. There were no groans, no shouts, almost no coughing. Sophie and Michael were tired too. Michael flopped into the chair and sat stroking the dog man, staring. Sophie perched on the stool, feeling strange. They had moved. It felt the same, but different, quite confusingly. And why was the moving castle now on the edge of the waist? Was it the curse pulling Howl towards the witch? Or had Howl slithered out so hard he'd come right back behind himself and turned into what most people would call honest? Sophie looked at Michael to see what he thought. Michael was asleep, and so was the dog man. Sophie looked at Calcifer instead, sleepily flickering among the rosy logs, with his orange eyes almost shut. She thought of Calcifer pulsing almost white, with white eyes, and then of Calcifer staring anxiously as he wobbled on the shovel. He reminded her of something. The whole shape of him did. "Calcifer," she said, "were you ever a falling star?" Calcifer opened one orange eye to look at her. "Of course," he said. "I can talk about that if you know. The contract allows me to." "And Howl caught you?" said Sophie. "5 years ago," said Calcifer, "out on Port Haven marches, just after he set up as Jenkin the Sorcerer. He chased me in 7-league boots. I was terrified of him. I was terrified anyway, because when you fall, you know you're going to die. I'd have done anything rather than die. When Howl offered to keep me alive, the way humans stay alive, I suggested a contract on the spot. Neither of us knew what we were getting into. I was grateful, and Howl only offered because he was sorry for me." "Just like Michael," Sophie said. "What's that?" Michael said, waking up. "Sophie, I wish we weren't right on the edge of the waste. I didn't know we would be. I don't feel safe." "Nobody's safe in a wizard's house," Calcifer said feelingly. Next morning, the door was set to black knob down, and to Sophie's great annoyance, it would not open at any setting. She wanted to see those flowers, witch or no witch. So she took out her impatience by fetching a bucket of water and scrubbing the chalked signs off the floor. Howl came in while she was doing it. "Work, work, work," he said, stepping over Sophie as she scrubbed. He looked a little strange. His suit was still dense black, but he turned his hair fair again. It looked white against the black. Sophie glanced at him and thought of the curse. Howl may have been thinking of it too. He picked the skull out of the sink and held it in one hand mournfully. "Alas, poor Yorick," he said. "She heard mermaids, so it follows there is something rotten in the state of Denmark. I've caught an everlasting cold, but luckily I'm terribly dishonest. I cling to that." He coughed pathetically, but his cold was getting better, and it didn't sound very convincing. Sophie exchanged looks with the dogman, who was sitting watching her, looking as doleful as Howl. "You should go back to Letty," she murmured. "What's the matter?" she said to Howl. "Miss Angorian not going well?" "Dreadfully," said Howl. "Lily Angorian has a heart like a boiled stone." He put the skull back in the sink and shouted for Michael. "Food! Work!" he yelled. After breakfast, they took everything out of the broom cupboard. Then Michael and Howl knocked a hole in the side wall of it. Dust flew out of the cupboard door and strange thumpings occurred. At last they both shouted for Sophie, and Sophie came, meanly carrying a broom. And there was an archway where the wall had been, leading to steps that had always connected the shop and the house. Howl beckoned her to come and look at the shop. It was empty and echoing. Its floor was now tiled in black and white squares like Mrs. Pentstemmon's hall, and the shelves which once held hats had a vase of waxed silk roses and a small posy of velvet cowslips on them. Sophie realised she was expected to admire it, so she managed not to say anything. "I found the flowers in the workshed out the back," said Howl. "Come and look at the outside." He opened the door into the street, and the same shop bell tinkled that Sophie had heard all her life. Sophie hobbled out into the empty early morning street. The shop front had been newly painted green and yellow. Curly letters over the window said, "H. Jenkins, fresh flowers daily." "Changed your mind about common names, haven't you?" said Sophie. "For reasons of disguise only," said Howl. "I prefer Pendragon." "And where do the fresh flowers come from?" Sophie asked. "You can't say that and just sell wax roses off hats." "Wait and see," said Howl, leading the way back into the shop. They went through and out into the yard Sophie had known all her life. It was only half the size now because Howl's yard from the moving castle took up one side of it. Sophie looked up beyond the brick walls of Howl's yard to her own old house. It looked rather odd because of the new window in it that belonged to Howl's bedroom, and it made Sophie feel odder when she realised that Howl's window did not look out onto the things she saw now. She could see the window of her old bedroom up above the shop. That made her feel odd too, because there didn't seem to be any way to get up into it now. As Sophie hobbled after Howl indoors again and up the stairs to the broom cupboard, she realised she was being very gruff. Seeing her old home in this way was giving her fearsome mixed feelings. "I think it's all very nice," she said. "Really?" said Howl coldly. His feelings were hurt. He did so like to be appreciated, Sophie thought, sighing as Howl went to the castle door and turned the knob to purple down. On the other hand, she did not think she ever praised Howl any more than Calcifer did, and she wondered why she should start now. The door opened. Big bushes loaded with flowers drifted gently past and stopped, so that Sophie could climb down among them. Between the bushes, lanes of long, bright green grass led in all different directions. Howl and Sophie walked down the nearest, and the castle followed them, brushing petals off as it went. The castle, tall and black and misshapen though it was, blowing its peculiar wisps of smoke from one turret or another, did not look out of place here. Magic had been at work here. Sophie knew it had. And the castle fitted somehow. The air was hot and steamy and filled with the scent of flowers, thousands of them. Sophie nearly said the smell reminded her of the bathroom after Howl had been in it, but she bit it back. The place was truly marvellous. Between the bushes and their loads of purple, red and white flowers, the wet grass was full of smaller flowers, pink ones with only 3 petals, giant pansies, wild phlox, lupins of all colours, orange lilies, tall white lilies, irises and myriad others. There were creepers growing flowers big enough for hats, cornflowers, poppies and plants with strange shapes and stranger colours of leaves. Though it was not much like Sophie's dream of a garden like Mrs. Fairfax's, she forgot her gruffness and became delighted. "You see," said Howl, and he swung out an arm and his black sleeve disturbed several hundred blue butterflies feasting on a bush of yellow roses. "We can cut flowers by the armload every morning and sell them in market chipping with the dew still on them." At the end of that green lane the grass became squashy. Vast orchids sprouted under bushes. Howl and Sophie suddenly came to a steaming pool crowded with water lilies. The castle veered off sideways round the pool and drifted down another avenue lined with different flowers. "If you come out here, bring your stick to test the ground with," said Howl. "It's full of springs and bog, and don't go any further that way." He pointed southeast, where the sun was a fierce white disk in the misty air. That's the waste over there. Very hot and barren and full of witch." "Who made these flowers right on the edge of the waste?" Sophie said. "Wizard Sullivan started it about a year ago," Howl said, turning towards the castle. "I think his notion was to make the waste flower and abolish the witch that way. He brought hot springs to the surface and got it growing. He was doing very nicely until the witch caught him." "Mrs. Pentstemon said some other name," Sophie said. "He came from the same place as you, didn't he?" "Yeah, more or less," said Howl. "I never met him, though. I came and had another go at the place a few months later. It seemed a good idea. That's how I came to meet the witch. She objected to it." "Why?" said Sophie. The castle was waiting for them. "She likes to think of herself as a flower," Howl said. "A solitary orchid blooming in the waste." Pathetic, really. Sophie took another look at the crowded flowers as she followed Howl inside. There were roses, thousands of them. "Won't the witch know you're here?" "Well, I tried to do the thing she'd least expect," said Howl. "And are you trying to find Prince Justin?" Sophie asked. But Howl slithered out of answering by racing through the broom cupboard and shouting for Michael. Chapter 18 is next, and it's called "In Which the Scarecrow and Miss Angorian Reappear." More next time.